Hello, hello. If you don't know me, my name is Kylan. This is my third reflection video, I believe. Yeah, my third one. Um, Once again, I make these videos to not only put my own thoughts out towards the world, but to hopefully, if whoever watches these videos, they can take what I say and, place it on their own lives. Not that what I say is, the law or anything, but sort of to help myself, but also help other people, if that makes sense. 'Cause, what I say can, or what I'm going through can also be what somebody else is going through at the same time. Um, but yeah, today's video is called "Love Is Patient." I think we've gotten so used to everything happening so instantly. You know, fast food, fast shipping. Um, fast replies. You can post something so instantly. You can text instantly. Um, I think somewhere along the way we started expecting love to work in the same way. Um, we expect instant chemistry, instant connection, um, instant certainty, but maybe love, was never meant to be rushed. I feel like if we sort of wait on love, that's what makes it a lot more genuine. Something that feels more real, you know, and it allows us to build our own foundation for when that love does come to us. Um, I think some of the strongest relationships I've ever seen, had one thing in common. They took time. It wasn't something that happened overnight. It wasn't something that, you know, took a day, took a few days, took weeks. It was months on months on months, maybe even years of building up something. Um, but not only building up their relationship, building up, themselves. Um, and they took time not because they were perfect, but because trust takes time, understanding takes time, forgiveness takes time, and genuine love takes time. Um, and I think usually anything worth building does. We don't wait. We don't rush building a house that is meant to survive a storm. We don't rush. Building skyscrapers that's meant to hold multiple floors and multiple people. Um, we don't plant a tree and expect it to grow instantly if we want it to last for decades. I feel like sometimes we confuse excitement with love. We think that because something happens so quickly, it must be meant to meant to last. You know what I mean? And I feel like fast doesn't always mean forever. Um, a spark can happen in a second. I feel like a fire that keeps people warm for years. That's built little by little. It's not something that is made. Just like that, snap of a finger. I've realized that waiting isn't always a bad thing. Our first reaction is usually to ask, why isn't it happening to me yet? Um, we see so many things around us, um, so many people's lives. We see our friends and relationships. We see um, parents and relationships. We see our peers, and I think that one thing I've always been taught is comparison is the thief of joy. The more we compare our lives to others, the more we start to dwell on, what we have and sort of become ungrateful of the process in a way. Because, everybody has their own process. Everything that, comes to you takes time. Um, and, I think a better question to ask is, what is this season trying to teach me? Because waiting has, a way of revealing things. It reveals our patience, our character, what we're willing to settle for and what we're willing to walk away from. Um, one thing my faith has taught me is I come back too often. In 1 Corinthians 13:4, it says, "Love is patient, love is kind." I've always found it very interesting that when, the Bible describes love, the very first word isn't passionate. It isn't, exciting, it isn't perfect, it's patience. That reminds me that, real love isn't in a hurry. Um, I don't think patience means sitting around and doing nothing necessarily. I think patience means uh, continuing to grow, even while life hasn't unfolded the way you expected. Learning, healing, becoming more honest, more compassionate, more secure in who you are, because the healthiest relationships aren't built by two perfect people. I feel like we all have our past, that we all have mistakes that made us into the person that we are today. And, um, I feel like when two people are willing to grow, that's when a relationship is, built to last, because you built that foundation not only for yourselves, but for each other and the standard that you hold each other to. Um, I think we live in a culture that tells us we're behind if we're still waiting. Social media makes it seem like everyone has their life figured out, but like I said, a lot of people's lives on social media isn't lives that they truly live. It's just what they want the world to see, because not everything is perfect. Like I said, I'm not perfect. I probably recorded this video about 10 times before I, finally made this one. But, you know, I think everyone's in love, everyone's succeeding, everyone's happy. But comparison has a funny way of making us forget that every story has a different timeline. Just because someone else's chapter looks different doesn't mean that your story is late. um, I think I've also learned that, loneliness can make almost anything look like love, really. Attention can feel like love. Consistency can be confused with compatibility. Being chosen can feel more important than being valued. But they're not always, the same thing. I think sometimes the hardest thing you can do is be patient enough to wait for what's genuine. Another verse that always encouraged me is Ecclesiastes 3:11. He has made everything beautiful in his time. Whether you see that, through faith or simply as a reminder that, life unfolds in seasons, I think there's a sort of wisdom in it. Some things become, more beautiful because they weren't rushed. A flower didn't grow into a flower overnight. A flower takes time. It takes, days of the sun, days of rain, and sooner or later it blossoms into something, into something beautiful. Um, and so maybe waiting isn't empty. Maybe it's where we become the version of ourselves that can truly appreciate what's coming. Maybe it's also about, becoming the right person, learning how to communicate, how to forgive, how to listen, how to stay when things get difficult. Those things aren't, learned overnight. And I feel like if you're waiting for love, don't let waiting convince you that you've been forgotten. Don't let impatience push you into something that costs your peace. The right things in life usually aren't rushed, they're built, like I said. And, one conversation, one act of trust, and it's one day at a time. And in closing, I don't want to leave y'all too long, but if there's one thing I hope you take away from this is don't rush love, don't force it, don't chase something, just because you've been afraid of waiting, because, real love has never been about speed, it's about trust, consistency, it's about choosing someone over and over again. And for me, my faith reminds me that some of the most meaningful things in life, they take time. And that's why I'm learning not to fear the waiting, but to grow through it. Because maybe love isn't late, maybe it's just being built. And yeah, that's my message for today. Thank y'all for watching. Hope y'all, take something from this video. Hopefully you can, sort of apply it to not only your own lives, but to others' lives. And, sooner or later we can help each other one by one. Like I said, just take it day by day, man. Life is never promised. You know, I feel if we live the right way, um, the right things will come our way. And yeah, to have that patience, have that, humility. Don't forget, you know, where you came from. Don't forget your roots. And yeah, stay true to yourselves. And once again, thank you. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Deuces.